and welcome to the Unknown Webcast. This is just a bit of a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving.
No, you
In
can't.
addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection. This week, our friend, I think he's still our friend,
Maybe.
Tom Gilson joins us to talk about something few consider the lonely apologist. My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. Our senior researcher is still Ron
Yeah,
Hensel,
as of
and
today.
he will introduce today's sponsors of the webcast. Here is Ronnie Baby.
Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and now we have
Whoop,
the copyright disclaimer.
whoop, 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 whoop. I can't believe I did that. I went over to get rid of it.
Okay. Okay, let me back up. I don't remember what oh yeah. Well, greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm tree came out, saw its shadow, and now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. World's End Theology Outlet, our regular legal disclaimer. Our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, Tom Gilson, that would be, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. This satirical content includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Notice the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too. If you enjoy it or if it really annoys you and you want to inflict it on someone else to ensure your continued access, please go to midwestoutreach.org, click the yellow donate button, and contribute as you feel led. And as you do, never fear, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. And now, our special guest, very special guest, Tom Gilson. A man who needs no introduction. Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, there we go.
I got a little worried when the fake applause took a minute to kick in, but
well, yeah, yeah, it is. Yeah, they were not sure about you.
that's what that was the concern. Yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes we have to pay just slightly extra for certain guests. So
yeah, welcome.
So it's you and I were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was an interesting subject, the lonely apologist. We don't really think about that too often. I recall years ago, Joy and I, when we first started reaching out to Jehovah's Witnesses, most everyone in our church wondered why we would do such a thing. And some would say, you're just wasting your time, you're blah, blah, blah. And so it kind of seemed like a lonely business until one day we walked into a convention of ex-Jehovah's Witnesses Now for Jesus. And it's almost like we felt like we came home. There's other people who speak the same language. They have the same passion. They want to do outreach to these groups. They see them as a mission field. And that was interesting. I later got involved with Evangelical Ministries to New Religions, which is now Evangelical Missions to Non-Christian Religions. And we have our annual conference, which is an opportunity for many of us who are involved in apologetics to gather together. So what brings you to have interest in the lonely apologist, and what sort of things are you trying out to work on that?
Well, it goes back to conferences, actually, and the privilege that a lot of us have to go to Christian conferences, apologetics conferences in particular, and the fact that not everybody can, and of course we can't do it all the time, but when you're there, it is such a rich experience being with people who think about the same kinds of things that I think about, that we think about, who care about the same sorts of things, have similar interests. My favorite conference of all, been there 4 or 5 times is the Defend Conference at New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, where everybody eats together. And there is just a lot of fellowship time. My co-team teacher there, Tim McGrew, and I have had fellowship times in our little rented faculty apartment there. And it's just been a rich time. But in some of these conferences, I've been leading breakout groups where I have raised the question, when you go home, obviously you're interested in apologetics. When you go home and you start talking apologetics in your church, how many of you feel lonely there? And consistently 2/3 of the people raise their hands. The other third are probably seminary students at the school that's hosting
when I ask that question, I hear these background singers going dum 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 dubby doo ah.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. Lonely apologist.
That's right. Yeah, it would be a good 50s song.
Yeah.
But it's true. People who have an interest in discipleship of the mind often find themselves alone in their churches. Churches are quick to talk about every other kind of ministry except for theology, polemics, apologetics, and those are actually ministries. But
I mean, do you think, I have two simultaneous thoughts that are battling each other for which one should go first.
Mm-hmm.
The first is that, when it comes to other people, when they hear what you're doing, I think a lot of people, there's so many people who are not conflict oriented and they see conflict.
Right.
They say you're deliberately putting yourself in a conflict, and some of them even go to the second step after that and might say, well, wait a minute, aren't we supposed to be more inviting and welcoming?
Right.
And shouldn't we? And maybe they have this assumption, maybe not, but maybe they do that. To do that, to be inviting, to be welcoming, means to kind of downplay the differences and play up the similarities, which, when you're dealing with like a Hare Krishna, that's kind of hard to do. But
right.
And the other thought that was trying to go first, but I didn't let it, was, to some extent, maybe this is more true recently, like with the rise of people like Tim Keller, who deliberately went into New York because this looks like hard soil. This looks like hard and thorny ground and all that. But, he writes this bestseller, Reasons for God, and he does an interest. When you see it done in person in the video, it's very different from the book, the video series. He is really doing apologetics in a New York type setting, where you just kind of sit down in a living room and just talk about things that they don't usually talk about. And a lot of times, I think since that has kind of come into the church, I hear more sermons where pastors are willing, from the pulpit at least, to do at least a certain style of apologetics, not really super confrontational, but they're willing to take on more hard questions than they used to be. So I don't want to sell them short. But as far as people in the pews, yeah, I think you're going to be lonely.
Well, the thing that you meant since you brought up Tim Keller, he's one of my favorite models because he introduces it so naturally without using the word apologetics. Apologetics is every apologist I know regrets the word. It's just the best thing I've ever heard on it was William Lane Craig saying apologetics doesn't mean you being sorry for what you believe, and it also doesn't mean making the other person sorry for what you believe. But it's what Keller does so well is he will be preaching through a passage, and then he'll say, now, here's where New Yorkers are going to have a problem with this. Let's deal with that. And he just takes the questions as they come. Apologetics is going to be a scary ministry in any church. Actually, there are reasons why even a pastor should be nervous about having someone come in and start teaching apologetics unless a pastor has good reason to trust that person.
Right.
It's going to be a scary ministry coming into any church. and it's going to be confrontational unless you come in as a servant and you come in saying, are there questions? Can I help answer anything? There are questions today. My goodness. If we could help people think in terms of ministering to people with questions and developing a cadre of people who are equipped and endorsed and deployed to do that gently and with reverence, I think it would really help the church in massive ways. And it would be good for apologists too, to have a place for finally someone to realize they're doing real ministry too.
When you say, boy, there are questions today, I kind of find that encouraging in a way. First of all, I think it's much easier to deal. I mean, questions give you a starting place.
Right.
Whereas when people tend not to have questions, and I think for a lot of times people just kind of dithered along in life and really didn't have many, there seemed to be a bigger percentage of the population was true. Now they give us a starting place. We don't have to kind of pry open the door the way we used to so often. And the other thing is, I think more of the questions are kind of, for many people, they seem to eventually gravitate toward the problem of evil because we're seeing so much of it right now. There's just so much that's going on. And what I found encouraging is that you do still find those people who say, therefore God cannot exist. They're still there. But I'm hearing more and more voices of people who can't go there, but they still want to know the answer to the question. They still want to know how your God, how the Christian God deals with that.
Because there are so few answers anywhere else. Nothing else in Eastern religions. It's typically a way of saying the evil isn't real. It's an illusion. It's Maya. In atheism, it's okay. We can call it evil, but we don't know how to define that in any terms because there's nothing actually good to compare it to in the structure of the universe or anywhere except for our own opinions, which vary. And so Christianity has the resources to take evil seriously for what it is and to offer a solution for it.
Yeah. And I think more people are willing to listen than used to be.
Yeah. I actually have a conversation with colleagues at the Stream, which I left Stream about a month ago, but maybe 2 months ago, conversation there at stream.org. We were talking about the church being asleep. We need to wake the church up. And it suddenly hit me. I don't think the church is asleep. I do not think the church is asleep any longer. If there's anybody who's not aware of issues in culture that are pressing hard in conflict against Christianity, they're in the minority. People know what's going on. The church is not asleep, I don't think. What the church is it's stuck in bed, paralyzed, because we don't know what to do. In motivational theory, you do, and you're motivated to do based on just a limited number of factors. One of the most important is it important to you? But another important one is, can I do anything? I think world peace is important, but I'm not tackling it as my main job because it's kind of out of reach.
Right.
And I think a lot of people with the questions of the day as Christians are in the same boat. I think these are important questions, but I don't know where to start. So I'm not asleep, but I'm staying in bed because I don't know what to do when I get up.
Right.
And if they could be equipped and deployed, I think they would come to real life. I mean, staying in bed is not, you don't do it for fun. Not, except for maybe a day or a week. But I mean, after a while, it gets old. People like to get up and get moving and living. And they need this in order to help get moving and living as Christians.
Yeah. Now I want to back up on a couple things. For example, apologetics. one of the things that we discovered long ago, and my friend Bill Hansberger, he's the vice president of evangelical missions to non-Christian religions. He and I were talking about this, and we decided what we needed to do is to talk about what we do rather than the tool we use. And here's what I mean.
Okay.
Christians understand missions. They understand missionary. They don't understand apologetics. And it scares them. Apologetics for us is a tool we use to carry out our mission work. And so we started describing ourselves as missionaries to cults and non-Christian religions. That is a picture they can grab a hold of.
Right.
Now, we have to get to apologetics because we start explaining the tools that we use in the mission field. And that also makes it a little less scary, but one of the things you point out is people are going, I don't even know where to begin. I'll just stay in bed because I just don't know what to do next. And so how can we do this where it doesn't feel confrontational, but rather a tool used to reach not only the lost, which is important, but those who are in the church but deconstructing, because they have reasonable questions very often that are not being answered.
Right. In terms of the missionary question, actually, this goes back to the 1990s, a church I was in. The pastor came back from a national denominational conference where the president reported to them that they were growing everywhere except in the United States. And I said, well, that's easy to explain. Everywhere else, they know they're missionaries. We don't know it here. And where that really makes a difference, where that comes in is that what missionaries are responsible for is, first of all, to know the gospel, to understand the gospel, to have it in their heart, in their heads, everything, so that what they're preaching is the gospel. But they have to learn the language, the customs, the stories, the questions, the taboos, the culture that they're in, and they have to address them for what they are. Why don't we see that as our responsibility here, to learn the questions, the stories, the taboos, the everything in the culture that we're in? I had the privilege back in the early 1980s of going through the course called the Perspectives on the World Christian Movement. It's a course that's been taught in cities everywhere across country, maybe across the world. It's an incredibly good introduction to missions. But I had the privilege of doing it under the founders of it at the U.S. Center for World Mission in Pasadena at the time. What stuck out to me, what so much stuck out to me there is the topic of worldview, is that you have to connect so that you understand the worldview. Well, that's an apologetic issue.
Right.
And if you can do that, you can understand how to communicate the gospel a whole lot more effectively.
I have told a story from time to time. I have a friend that lives in Colorado. I met her on a trip to Israel. She was in a seat next to me, and she was reading some sort of New Age book. And I asked her a question, and she kind of said, this go away, you fundamentalist bigot sort of response. And I thought, well, this could be kind of fun. And so I asked her a question, and she gave me another go away, you fundamentalist bigot again.
Now, did she use those actual words or?
Well, no, but that's really how it comes out.
Yeah.
And so I asked her again, and so she closes the book and she looks at me, she goes, okay, you want to talk about this stuff? Let's talk. And she starts rolling off all of her objections. And I stopped her and I said, where did you get your worldview at? And she stopped and she looked at me and she goes, what's a worldview? And so I explained it to her, and she then goes on to tell me that she grew up in church, and she would ask questions, and the pastors and elders and so forth would just say, oh, you just have to take it by faith.
No.
And she would go then to another church and ask questions, and I say, you just got to take it by faith. And she felt like, I don't understand this, and there doesn't seem to be an answer. I mean, where she lives, she says, I know where Cuba is, and I knew what the Cuban Missile Crisis was, but I don't know what the crisis is here. I don't understand the Christian faith, and no one seems to want to tell me the secret. And so she met someone who introduced her to a book called the Urantia book. Uh, and
Hmm.
and she said, "Now this is interesting. You can tempt me. You cannot tempt me with sex. You cannot tempt me with money, but you can tempt me with knowledge. I want to know stuff." And so
Mhm.
they had answers in this book. And as she discovered as we were talking, they had answers. They just were not true answers.
Mhm.
And
Right.
right. And
Right.
so the next 10 days, she was my shadow all over Israel, just writing everything she could ask and write it down. And she went home and she started reading books, and she would call me each week and say, "Okay, I just finished. I don't have enough
Wow.
faith to be an atheist. What do I read next?" And within months, she had one of the best apologetics books in her part of the country.
Hmm.
Amazing lady. But
Wow.
she just needed answers.
I have heard so many horror stories of people who got that answer from churches that, take it by faith. We don't ask questions here. That is so disturbing. It is so unbiblical. The Bible is full of questions, and the Bible answers questions. The Bible encourages questions. It is
Well, Bob, Don,
it's just, and that's a misunderstanding of what faith is anyway.
Right.
Don, you used to say every once in a while, pastors don't know what to do with apologists.
Right.
And
Right.
a lot of times they just keep them at arm's length or maybe even kind of further
Hmm.
until somebody joins a cult in their church,
Hmm.
Right.
or somebody calls them because their kid has joined a cult, or in a case like this, they've gone off and joined the Rancho movement. But you've just put your finger on what causes, or one of the causes of that very thing that makes the apologist necessary. In other words, I'm not saying in all cases, but apparently in a certain number of them, the church is actually contributing to the problem that leads to the need for apologists in the church. And so there's a dynamic going on where it's like, go away from me until I create a problem that you can come and fix.
Right.
They don't know they're doing that, but many times they are. And we've also kind of touched on the basic theme that many Christians are just averse to apologetics for various reasons, their misperceptions about it, and so on. But to bring us back to the whole lonely apologist theme, since this is going on,
Hmm.
since apologists are being kept at arm's length, I'm wondering what is the if you were just to survey apologists in general. I mean, not people who write books and people who go on the touring circuit and all that, but just including every single Tom, Dick, and Mary who is out there trying to do it at the lay level.
Right.
I wonder how much church hopping goes on among them because they have a hard time finding a church where they feel welcome.
Yeah, I don't have my finger on that. I do know that the odds of finding a church where they're welcome and fits everything else, they tend to be low. What we're doing about it here in Southwest Ohio, Cincinnati, Dayton area, is we're gathering apologists. And by apologists, I mean the same people that you're talking about, apologetics interested people, AIPs, or whatever. And we meet once a month and we have a couple hours together, and it's mostly fellowship. We do not make it a course. It is absolutely not a class. It is the standard that we started with was we have 2 hours. Let's kick it off with a 20-minute discussion starter, and let's just have fellowship. And the and the friendships that built and the discussion that just keeps on flying all the way through this is just amazing. And in an earlier version of this, one that failed because it got shifted into being a course and it fell apart. An
Right.
earlier incarnation of this, though, I was talking with someone who was there, and we had lunch together, and she said at the end of our talk at lunch, she said with tears in her eyes, "Thank you, Tom. I hadn't made her sad." She said, "I never get to talk about these things. I never get to talk about these things that I'm so interested in." And that is a common experience. We have people coming to the Apologetics Fellowship here. That's what we call it. That's simple. We have a very simple website at apologeticsfellowship.org. And we have people there who have been to big conferences in the last couple of weeks, but when they came to Apologetics Fellowship said, "I have been waiting for this. This is what I want."
Right.
Not the conference, but the fellowship, because it's so lonely. But I think that this is part of the answer. It's not the whole thing, because it has to go back into the churches, but is crucial, and it's been incredibly positive for this group. And we've even seen another group spin off of it called Dayton Apologetics.
I like to think that my denomination, the PCA, has less of a problem with this than many. In other words,
right. I'm in PCA too. I think you're probably right. Yes.
Yeah, and so then you're going to be a little bit familiar with some of the themes I'm going to touch on here, I hope. I won't say it 100%, but I would say that if you walk into a PCA church, I think the odds are better that your pastor won't be put off in any way if you tell them, "Well, I'm really into apologetics." Right. And I think that's also true in many Reformed Baptist churches too. I can think of one that's near us, a couple actually that are near us, where I think an apologist would be welcome. I mean, you keep an eye on the personality of anybody walking into your church to make sure they're not a little unhinged. But in the PCA, as you're aware, probably that, about 9 years ago, Brian Chappell, who was formerly president of Covenant Seminary, he created this taxonomy. I hope I get it right, because I've seen variations of it. You got the confessionalists, who might be considered also doctrinalists, and then you have like the missionalists, and the missionalists they're interested in doing the kind of thing Tim Keller was doing, not so much the kind of thing that an apologist might be interested in doing. Sometimes you see really maybe more healthy blends of that within a particular church, but a lot of times they are kind of polarized, and you're going to find one or the other, depending, especially if you go into an urban area. If you find a church that's really into like missionalism, probably not so much. You probably less of a chance of finding an interest in doctrine and apologetics. So in other words, there is within our group a tendency to, our tribe, let's call it that, a tendency to see this polarization like as a microcosm of what's going on in evangelicalism as a whole. But in evangelicalism as a whole, I think, though, it is more skewed into what you would call the missional, which they don't use that word usually, but some more and more maybe they do. And so they're really into reaching the lost, and they haven't figured out how apologetics fits into that. Oddly.
Yeah, that's astonishing, because if you're going to reach the lost, you're going to encounter their questions.
Right.
And if you're going to reach your own teenagers, you ought to be listening to their questions. You can't do it without encountering questions. And some of them are hot. I mean, once on the campus of Ohio State, I was engaged in, I won't call it a discussion. It's with a Ratio Christi leader there by the name of Eric Chabot. He was tabling there, and it was a chance for people to encounter some kind of discussion about Christ. And this guy came up, and red-haired temper, I think, who just, he said, he started yelling about Christian. Gays should have the right to this. Gays should have this right. Gays need to have this right. Gays have. And he kept going. I tried to say something. And when I finally slipped something in, I said, do Christians have the right to finish the sentence? And he said, no. And so sometimes it gets hot. I didn't try to actually engage in apologetics with that, but because you do what you can do. But there are crises of conscience even that people experience. A friend of mine who's worked in a headquarters building, in a tall building, big city, where he was on one of the executive-ish floors where everybody had their own office. Everybody on his floor had a gay ally sticker on their office door except for him. He hadn't done a thing, but he was doing something wrong. What do you do? And the answer to that is not obvious, but the thing that I cannot forget from that conversation, as I said, is anybody at your church, a good church, great preacher, but is anybody at your church helping you deal with this? And he said, no. Churches ought to be the place where Christians can deal with Christian crises of conscience and get some help.
Right.
This is the kind of question we're encountering too, which is, do I go to my son's same-sex wedding?
Right.
What do I do about everything's political?
What do I do when a directive comes? When a directive comes down from headquarters that we must use people's preferred pronouns, their customers, we must always do that. What do we, that has thrown people in my church into a crisis when it's come up.
And we are not helping.
We're not. Now, we are going to take a short break, and then I have a couple thoughts I'd like to share while I still have a couple thoughts. Ron.
Sharing.
Right.
Yes, our good friends at World's End Theology Outlet have some questions. Are you troubled by the existence of countless Christian denominations? Do you tend to think that everyone's judgment is questionable except yours? Do you have a nose for excellent marketing opportunities? Well, the Heterodox Company presents the do-it-yourself one true church kit. Everything you need to shut untold millions out of God's kingdom. With the One True Church kit, you get doctrinal options, practical options, your own church history, proselytizing gimmicks, and so much more. But wait, you also get scores of church architectural plans and building rental options. And it comes with ringing endorsements. A pastor in Indianapolis said, thanks to the do-it-yourself One True Church kit, my disciples are so narrow they can look through a keyhole with both eyes. A pope in Phoenix says, it's a great product. I've never had so many people kiss my ring. And a church in Philadelphia says, go away. Now that we're the One True Church, we don't waste our time with spiritual peasants like you. The do-it-yourself One True Church kit. Everything you need to shut untold millions out of God's kingdom. Available at World's End Theology Outlet, your one-stop resource for half-baked heresies, dubious doctrines, and other ideas whose time has gone. So get a hold of that, and you're on your way.
You are on your way. So Krista points out, which will give me kind of another jumping off point here, that apologetically minded people looking for solid churches can find it challenging to properly love and support the church due to frustration of what we are finding in the church. Now, I have to salute that because,
good point.
I find a lot of, let's say, unintentional heresy in churches. I want to be a little careful because I don't think pastors wake up in the morning and say, okay, what can I teach false to my people this week? I think it creeps in because no one's paying attention to where it's coming from or what it is. And so you have the creep of New Apostolic Reformation, the creep of Enneagram, the creep of Christian yoga. It's very creepy stuff.
Yeah.
and we are viewed as divisive. Now, my friend, the late Dr. Norm Geisler, used to comment on that accusation that it probably is true. But he said when he got married, he promised to divide from all other women, and nobody thought that was a bad thing.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes being divisive is a necessary part of what we do to divide between the true and the false. The
Right.
problem we have is many in church leadership see us as troublemakers. That's the word I want to grasp. And so building a relationship over a long period of time can resolve that. Sometimes it's just not. They're just not going to
Well,
buy into
there,
it.
a couple of things on that.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, I remember when I was really, this is like late 70s, early 80s, when I was just getting into witnessing to Jehovah's Witnesses, and I linked up with one ex-Jehovah's Witness, and we started trying to navigate our way through doing this in the Chicago area. And he had some connections, like you do, Don. He's kind of a networker, and he actually tried to get Walter Martin, and found out that the price tag was a bit too high for us at the time. The expense that it would take to do that. But he linked up with other people. And every once in a while, I'd say, well, how about we get this guy? And he'd say, well, he has personality problems. And that was his favorite way of saying, this guy has, he probably would have used more specific language today. But it was a very nice way of saying, yeah, you're just asking for trouble with this person. He probably has really good things to say. Maybe he even wrote a book. But, he just doesn't mesh well with people.
Right.
Particularly the people he might have to work with when he gets here. And, I think that maybe this was more true, I don't know, back 40, 50 years ago, but, people tended to pigeonhole themselves into, okay, this is an academic pursuit, and not work on the other aspects of your personality and sanctification, really, to be blunt about it, that you need to work on in order to do it in actual real time. So you do have people, I think, I don't want to put the responsibility for the existence of lonely apologists solely on the shoulders of other Christians and pastors. I think some of it's us.
Right.
Some of it is us.
For people who want to have an apologetic, I was trying to find something just now I read in the last several chapters of 1 Corinthians this morning about divisions, where Paul stunningly says they were necessary so that we would know who was true.
Right.
I couldn't find it, but the way to get a ministry in apologetics, we're trying to work on that here at the Apologetics Fellowship, is really the same way you have a ministry in a nursery, teaching nursery or something like that. It's by developing relationships and trust, especially if you're going to start a new ministry. You have to be trusted by the leadership of the church, and you have to be able to meld with them and be a co-worker with them. I gave a talk once to the Apologetics Fellowship on the 4 keys to church ministry, and it was
what is that?
Talk. Oops,
I think it's World War III coming. I forget.
Dinging into that noise. Yep. It was a talk with 4 points, and I was able to alliterate them. They all started with R, and the 4 points were relationship, 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 and relationship. And I got all proud of myself because I got them to rhyme too. So
that's a big achievement.
And I was sitting across the table from a pastor once, actually a leader of pastors in the local area here, and I said, "How do I get to have a ministry in apologetics in your church?" And he said, and he pointed at the table where we were sitting, and he said, "This," and he meant sitting down and having lunch. And I did not go in there to lunch saying, "I'm an apologist and I'm here to tell you what you need and how I can help you." I went in there and said, and I just asked him, "Tell me your story. Then what are you dealing with? What's it like?
Right.
And I listened. And I actually kind of started doing that as a hobby with different pastors. And if pastors can get the sense that people in their churches care for the ministry and care for the ministry leader and care for, we're experts in one little narrow branch of ministry.
Right.
We're really good at it. It's just one little branch of ministry. They have to be generalists, and there are very few pastors are good at everything. And of course, if it's a ministry of the mind like apologetics, they might feel like they should be, and they might feel guilty or threatened. That would be their problem, and you have to face that. But it's okay to have someone serving in the church who's skilled in it, but they have to trust that person.
Trust. That's an important thing, and it takes time to develop that. Unfortunately, most want to be instant used, and so when I get calls from people who want to get involved with this, I usually start off with, if you think you're going to be used immediately and often, you probably just want to go teach Sunday school, because there's a high burnout rate in this. Average person stays 2 years and then they're done. And a lot of the reason, I think, is, as you just laid out, there's a trust issue. Many pastors think of apologetics not just as divisive, but as mean-spirited.
Yeah.
Because the apologists they've met are mean-spirited. Right? So that's an aspect.
Sure.
Another is,
by the way, it's not good strategy to try to argue your pastor into liking arguing.
Yeah, exactly. It probably is not.
And boy, there's a lot of apologists doing that. But go ahead. Yeah.
Well, another thing. Now, I am fortunate. I have to admit, I am very fortunate. Our pastor loves what we do. There are 3 apologists in his church of about 150, and we all basically get along. 2 of us are married, so that's helpful. But he sees me not just as someone who defends the faith, but a resource for stuff that he cannot keep up with.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what the new books are out there that people are bringing into his church. He's busy doing his ministry stuff. Or let's take a really hotbed issue, politics. Someone in our church might be saying, and I've had this happen, trying to argue one of their offspring, let's say, into, you have to love this particular candidate. Otherwise, the nation is gone. Well, whatever the truth to that may be, he called me and says, I don't know what to do. What would you suggest? And I said, I would suggest this. Ask her a simple question. Does she love her child more than she loves the president? Or does she love the president more than she loves her child? And he goes, I never thought of that. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you're not arguing about the political issues. You're talking about, how do I care for my child, and how do I have this relationship with them apart from this issue?
Yeah.
I think apologists can help in those areas, because we don't have to defend everything.
Yeah, that's true. And if you're a skillful apologist, you know what to fight and what not to fight. And by the way, you're also kind of experienced in answering challenging questions like that one, which isn't necessarily an apologetics question,
Right?
But it's a confrontational question. I love the approach Greg Kokel has with tactics, where you lead with questions, and he's got such an incredibly good guide to that. The answer to almost every confrontation is to start with questions, and Jesus did it often. So, yeah.
He did. I love that. And it was kind of interesting when he came out with it, because that has kind of always been my process. When I get a phone call from a parent, a friend, a neighbor, somebody who has now, someone has gotten into a cult or a false teaching or something like that, and they'll call me, and a conversation will be kind of like, I have a Jehovah's Witness coming to my house in an hour. What verse do I give them? which tells me what they're looking for is a silver bullet verse that they just fire at somebody and they immediately fall to the floor in faith.
Yeah.
I
No.
said, that
Yeah.
verse doesn't exist. Here's what I would suggest. The first time they meet, offer them coffee and ask them how they got into the organization. They said, why? I said, because if you listen, they are going to tell you the important questions you need to ask down the road
Yeah.
to get to the important question of who is Jesus. But if you go in thinking you're going to open the Bible to John 1:1 and they're going to go, oh, I've never seen that before,
No.
you're in for a big surprise.
Yeah. Yeah. They've seen it before.
Yeah.
Not in various forms. Yeah.
I think there's been a, I'm a big, okay, let me back up. I think there's two models of teaching people how to do stuff, like be an apologist. But there are two models that we use for teaching everything. Being an apologist is just one of those things. And you see this at the seminary level and in various professions, which is you have the classroom model and then the practicum model. And they're for some reason, when it comes to any kind of evangelism, we kind of do battle between those two models. And I think an apologist, he gravitates more to the classroom model. At least when I'm studying apologetics, I'm into books, and I'm into lectures, and I want to hear the reasons and the answers. And I might attend an occasional debate. Well, I really don't, but I might or watch one. But that's about the closest I get to a kind of a social contact situation.
Right.
Other than when after I've gathered all my information, I'm going to go and confront somebody with how wrong they are. And the practicum model would say, no, what you need to do is you need to come alongside someone who's been doing it for a while and learn from them and how they do it. I think we saw this a lot with D. James Kennedy. He at least with his
evangelism explosion.
Yeah, I'm thinking of the word. I don't want to use the word mantra. His maxim.
Okay.
Better caught than taught.
Oh yeah.
At the same time, if you went through evangelism explosion, you did a lot of memorization and you learned a lot of rote memory, which I'm not sure how helpful that was. For some people, it might have been extremely helpful. But I think we coming alongside somebody and showing them how to do it, giving them a feel for it. I think the person who's done the best, a couple of people come to mind. One of them, his name escapes me, but I think they know each other and have worked together. Greg Kokel is one of them. He's been the best, I think, at putting it in writing.
Right.
You're almost like next to the guy while he's telling you stories and you're reading his book.
Yeah.
And you're getting a pretty good feel for what it would be like to be in a practicum situation just by reading him. So you're not so much memorizing facts as you're getting a feel for how you should approach the situation socially, which I think would benefit a lot of people who want to get into apologetics. So
yeah, and for the practicum, the gold standard would be what Brett Kunkel, Sean McDowell, J. Warner Wallace, and I think Jim Wallace has done this. The mission trip to Salt Lake City, or the mission trip to Berkeley, preceded by months of teaching, and these high school students are going into the heart of atheism or progressivism or Mormonism, and they are facing the actual questions, and they're failing, and then they're learning.
Right.
And at least we should be giving people a chance to practice.
Yeah.
Well, and we do that. Midwest Christian Outreach, Bill Hunsberger at Haven Ministries, and Audrey has been part of some of the things we do. Carl Tykrib, he's in Canada.
Yep.
And so we do things like going to the Parliament of the World's Religions. There's like 12 of us that do
a lot
this.
like it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's 8,500 people from around the planet, from every possible world religion you can imagine. And so the dozen or so of us go there. And as we take new people, we prepare them. Okay, you have to be prepared because they dress odd, they eat weird things, they just, and you have to treat them with respect, even if you disagree with them, and ask questions. And so they start doing that. Well, our guy Jeff went with us to two of them, and he's amazed at how many people he gets to talk to. Uh, he sat next to Mary Ann Williamson, for example. She was running for
Wow,
president.
there you go.
Yeah. He calls me up. He goes,
your eyebrows went up there.
right. He goes, where do I start? I said, ask her a question. He goes, oh.
And, you know,
It's
I just had just as I'm sitting here, I had I mean, I just noticed on my X feed, I've been another Christian fellow and I have been having a debate with this woman online about inerrancy, biblical inerrancy. And she's been very upset. You know, how can you believe in biblical inerrancy? And she's arguing against it, and she's bringing up all. And finally, I think we just said, look, I guess we just disagree, right? You know, and she said, I mean, I guess we'll all see one day. I'm just glad to be free of some of the theology that I was once burdened with. In other words, she used to believe in inerrancy, and now she doesn't. It's unnecessary and incorrect, and the Bible makes, and she puts it in all caps, so much more sense without it. Okay, I'm already like face palming here, right? But then she says something that just makes me understand why she's taken this position. She says God can be a loving and just God and not a monster that I have to explain. Whoa. It's like, so that's why you deny inerrancy, because there are parts of the Bible that embarrass you. I just wrote back. You can tell me, you both can tell me whether you think I did the right thing here. I was thinking, should I put it in a question or not? Well, I just wrote, I'm not sure what's particularly unloving or unjust about biblical inerrancy. In other words, it's kind of my way of saying, well, maybe you could explain to me, you know, because you jumped from an argument about biblical inerrancy to what seems to be a totally unrelated point, but I think there's a real connection.
Yeah, that's the place to start, because if you jumped into explaining the genocide of the Amalekites and she'd never heard of it, you've just given her one more thing to worry about.
Right, exactly.
You have to find out what it is that she's concerned over.
Well,
by the way, there is an answer for that for the viewing audience to know. We do have ways of addressing that, but go ahead.
Oh yeah, well, in fact, the Amalekites did come up in this conversation somewhere, and of course, we know what they did in the Pentateuch to the Israelites. We know that God told the Israelites, okay, when you're established in the land and you've got peace all around, it's kind of like, you know, I mean, it sounds to modern people, it kind of sounds like something that Don Corleone said to Michael before he died. You know, yeah, you got to take care of them, you know. Right. But it was God's vengeance being worked through his people, which I'm going to tip my hat to Meredith Klein here. Maybe you've heard his arguments on this. In other words, this is not something the church does today. This is what he calls an intrusion of God's end time judgment into the situation in Israel.
Right.
So it's not. So yeah, it's a picture of what's going to happen to all people who treat the people of God, you know, the way they so often do.
But to your discussion, the thing that you did was important, because if you miss her real question, you're not gonna get to
right. I mean, I was wondering if we ever would get down to what is really driving this. There's something under the surface that's driving unbelief.
Yeah.
Now, and see, the lonely apologist. To go back to here, I think something that Tom has gone back to a couple of times is having gatherings where you have others who are involved in a similar kind of mission, ministry, whatever you want to call it, just to be able to talk about those sorts of things without trying to solve the dilemma. Just to go, this is what I ran into, and you can pray with each other, talk to each other, encourage each other. Kind of like what we're doing here. I mean, we've all got stories to tell, and some of them are true, which is helpful.
Those are the best kind.
Yeah. For those who are anywhere near Cincinnati or Dayton, go to apologeticsfellowship.org. We are meeting actually this Saturday. We meet once a month, and this is it. And if other people want to find out about it, go to the contact page at apologeticsfellowship.org and get a hold of me that way. And we'll see what we can do to pass along the actually simple way that it has worked for us. But I would really hope that people understand that this is about building relationship for the sake of building relationship, for the sake of serving the church and doing evangelism. And we have to emphasize relationship, partly because that's how ministry gets done, and partly because it's not necessarily how apologetics always gets done. It's not exactly our strong point.
Mm-hmm.
And so we emphasize it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's important because, as you know, you've been around the block more than twice, and I have, and Ron has, is sometimes, and we're going to be doing something on this in a few weeks with one of our friends from South Africa, Rudolf Boshoff. There are some engaged in apologetics that are more harmful to what we do than helpful. Now, I say this tongue in cheek because I wear a cowboy hat and fringe jackets and stuff, but they're kind of cowboys out there, and they will fight over everything. They will fight at the drop of a hat, and they'll drop the hat. I have a dozen of them, so I'm well armed.
Yeah.
But the question is every issue worth fighting about?
And I would say the question is more, what are you trying to win?
Right. The person of the argument.
Yeah.
And it's
to me,
really,
that's the
really
one
hard.
that defines the difference. If you want to be the victor in an argument, go be a lawyer or something.
And a lot of times the reason we want to win the argument is so that we can feel more sure about our position rather than to persuade. I mean, obviously we want to persuade the other person.
Right.
But I think sometimes we're prioritizing our own feeling of security in our position.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. And for example, the more I know about, for example, the one that comes to mind most often is the questions of sexuality. The more I understand the reasons for our position, the more calmly I can have conversations with people about it.
Right.
I don't get anxious. I don't get defensive. I don't get needy for myself. I can listen. I can answer. And it's okay. I'm more friendly if I know what I'm talking about, actually.
Yeah, of course, the problems come up when they bring up something you've never heard of. They bring up a point that's out of left field, and you don't know how to answer it because you just never heard it before.
Right.
My experience is twofold in that regard. Number one is it always ends up being something that when I investigate it, I mean, literally always, without exception, in 50 years of being a Christian now, almost, it always turns out to be something where I investigated. It turns out to be smoke and mirrors. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is, doesn't matter. I still get upset. It's like I'm thrown for a loop. I still feel like, okay, what if I'm wrong? What if my whole worldview is going to fall apart because of this one little thing? And it's a problem. It's us, really. It's me. It's not them. It's that Satan has found a weakness in me that he knows how to exploit. So what I've got to do is back up and say, and learn how to say, I need to look into that, and just remind myself that every time I do, I end up coming to the same conclusion. And when I come back with the information, what I discover is it doesn't convince them anyways.
Right.
I was watching a video of Charlie Kirk. I don't really watch Charlie Kirk videos all that much, but he's a conservative guy. And of course, they love to put up the videos where their hero absolutely destroys the opposition. They like to use that. They destroyed it. They answered. Many times they just give a good answer.
Right.
And in this particular case, Charlie Kirk gave a series of good answers. And the guy at the microphone who was talking to him basically dropped the F-bomb on him and walked away. He ran out and he just said blankety blank blank and he left. And Charlie Kirk all he said was, yeah, that happens a lot.
Yeah. Well, it happened to Jesus too. And we,
Right.
and I know you're not saying that apologetics has no value in evangelism, because there are those who do respond.
Oh, I would never say that. No.
And my friend Tim McGrew talks about a long email exchange with a skeptic, and back and forth over one question after another, one challenge after another. It's like, this guy's just throwing up smoke screens and stuff like that. And his wife Lydia was doing this with him, and the way he tells the story, he said, we decided that when we answered this last email that it was the last email. We were done. So they answered it, and the guy wrote back and he said, well, that was my last one. You've answered them all.
Mm.
How do I become a Christian?
Wow.
So, boy, it's hard knowing when that moment is. That's a Holy Spirit decision. But there are good reasons to give answers still.
I mean, I would go so far as to say that all evangelism is at some point in some level apologetics. It's a
Right.
reason for the hope that is within you.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that we tend to equate apologetics with when it gets to the answer stage, when you're challenged, and always be ready to give an answer for the reason, for the hope that is within you. And that's the word apologetics right in there, or apologia. And so I think it's impossible to really, you're going to get questions. You're at every time you present the gospel, you're going to get some kind of question. It might not seem like a real pushback question, at least maybe because you're going to find it so easy to handle, or maybe because they don't seem hostile. But people have different ways of resisting that don't necessarily seem hostile. So you have to be careful not to misinterpret a question that might sound like, oh, I just want to know this. It might not be that at all. So, yeah, but I don't think you can do evangelism for more than a few minutes without engaging in apologetics.
Right. Now, I want to go back to what you were just talking about, Tom. This continual, no matter what you answer, they come back with a different question. And my friend, the late Jan Moskowitz, told me a story about someone who was doing something like that. And he stopped him after a few of those questions, and he said, if I give you the answer, will you believe?
Right.
And he said, no. He said, well, then it's pointless to carry on.
Right.
Honest questions deserve honest answers. Dishonest questions don't deserve any answers. And so
right.
I have used that. I think that's an important thing to
I think when they say that, what they're saying is, the reason I'm asking these questions is to persuade you, not to be persuaded by you. So of course I'm not going to believe.
Right.
And especially for online debates.
Yes.
I wrote I thought it was going to be a blog post, but when it went to 13,000 words, I turned it became a published Kindle ebook. You can get it on Amazon. It's called How Would Jesus Blog?
Oh, I love that.
Handling adversarial people online, Jesus way. And this is about adversarial people, not about people who are just asking questions, but people who are in it for the fight. What Jesus did, two things. One is he did something to cause them to look at themselves. Like, it was John's baptism from heaven or from men? And they went off, and I don't know if they realized it, but everybody else knew they were practicing politics, not theology, when they went off and decided how to answer that question. So that was revealing their character. And he didn't say you're all just a bunch of politicians. He gave them the opportunity to prove it.
Right.
So sometimes when I'm online, I will say to somebody, this is what I see you doing. Do you like yourself that way? The other thing that Jesus did, besides kind of mirroring their character to them frequently, was he disengaged.
Mm-hmm.
There's a series of debates that he stays in the middle chapters of the book of John, but in an awful lot of cases, he just let it end.
Right.
And when they were his adversaries, he just stayed in it a minute, and then it was over, and he disengaged, and it's okay. Somebody online once told me, "You're a Christian. You have to witness to me. You have to answer my questions." Yeah. Okay.
Well,
no, that's not the case.
That brings me to my second point, and I find myself having to do this every year or two, as someone who has come out of a false religious movement of some kind, has come to the faith. They're now passionate about trying to reach back into the movement, but they're attacked by other apologists, let's say. And so they spend their time defending themselves. And so I call them up and I'll say, okay, repeat after me. This is very important, maybe the most important thing you're going to hear from me, at least ever. Just because someone invites you to a gunfight doesn't mean you have to show up.
Mm-hmm.
You do not have to defend everything someone says about you, because they're going to say a lot of stuff. So either you decide which gunfights you're going to get into and only take those on, or get out of this because you are going to lose your mind.
Yeah. 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 This is the people, when they think of spiritual battle, they always run to Ephesians 6, but there's a spiritual battle passage in 2 Corinthians 10 where it talks about dealing with arguments. And this is spiritual battle. And it's going to feel like it sometimes.
It is.
But Jesus said in John 16 that in this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world.
Yeah.
He sends us out as sheep in the midst of wolves, but the good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep.
Now, I didn't include, but I will include, if you send this to me, the link to your apologetics site.
Okay.
Because I want people to get a hold of that.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also going to mention the EM&R conference, and I will put that in. For those who've not been to an apologetics conference, a conference of missionaries and those to cults and non-Christian religions, we're going to be in Jacksonville, Florida, near the end of June, July, August, near the end of August. And we've got a pretty interesting lineup there, talking about a whole slew of things like transformational festivals, Burning Man, those sorts of things. That's a mission opportunity. You got 80,000 people in one place, and maybe a half a dozen Christians. It's a rich mission field if you know how to ask the questions and talk to people. So we're going to be doing a lot of those kinds of things. But Tom, thank you for being with us again.
Well, thank you.
Ron, would you walk us out of here?
Yeah, let's give credit to whom credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil Before Me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Culinary services are provided by Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage comes from Armageddon, and D. Opposer, our Mormon Archives manager, is Polly Gummas. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau Chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage comes from Ben Hur. Special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster and flying turkeys, Ode to Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoli Pulling. Technical assistance comes through Murky Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham & Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna Pisami. Our director of privacy assurance is Wiretapping. And original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach, Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law.
Never happened.
We're waiting. Eventually, maybe one day.
All right, you all. We will see you next time.